The rain hammered against the windows of the FBI field office in Richmond, Virginia, creating rivers of distortion that transformed the city lights into abstract paintings of amber and crimson. Elizabeth Harper stood before the evidence board, her reflection ghost-like in the glass, superimposed over crime scene photographs that had become her constant companions these past 3 months. Each image represented not just a life stolen, but a message left behind, a taunt wrapped in tragedy that spoke to something deeper than mere violence. "You're doing it again," Jake Williams observed from the doorway, his voice cutting through the white noise of rain and fluorescent humming. He carried 2 cups of coffee, the steam rising like spirits in the cold office air. "Standing there like you can will the answers into existence through sheer determination." Liz didn't turn around. Her fingers traced the red string connecting the victims, each line a pathway through someone else's final moments. "He wants us to see something, Jake. Every killer leaves a signature, but this one, he's writing us a novel, and we're too blind to read it." The Enigma, as the media had christened him, had claimed 7 lives across 3 states in 6 months, but calling them victims felt wrong somehow, incomplete. They were participants in something larger, selected not for who they were, but for what they represented in his grand design. A kindergarten teacher from Baltimore, a mechanic from Philadelphia, a nurse from Newark. Different ages, different backgrounds, different everything, except for one detail that gnawed at Liz's consciousness, like a splinter working its way deeper into flesh. "The roses," she whispered, accepting the coffee without looking away from the board. "He leaves a single white rose at every scene, but the number of thorns removed is different each time. 7 thorns on the first, 5 on the second, then 8, then 2. Jake moved beside her, his presence solid and grounding in a way that both comforted and irritated her. They'd been partners for only 2 months, thrown together by Assistant Director Morrison when the case had escalated beyond local jurisdiction. Jake brought 15 years of homicide experience from Detroit's streets, where killers were usually driven by passion, greed, or desperation. This was different. This was deliberate in ways that made even seasoned investigators uncomfortable. "Maybe the thorns are just part of his ritual," Jake suggested, though his tone betrayed his own doubt. "Serial killers often have compulsions they can't explain even to themselves." But Liz knew better. Everything about the Enigma screamed intention. The bodies were always discovered exactly 72 hours after death, positioned with mathematical precision. The crime scenes were pristine, except for what he wanted found. Even the victims' last meals, always purchased by the killer and left partially consumed, seemed to tell a story they couldn't quite grasp. Her phone vibrated against the desk, the screen illuminating with a number she didn't recognize. She almost ignored it, but something, perhaps that same instinct that had made her one of the Bureau's youngest senior investigators, compelled her to answer. "Agent Harper," she said, her voice steady despite the sudden acceleration of her pulse. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with possibility. Then a voice, cultured and measured like a professor addressing a particularly slow student. "Agent Harper, I've been waiting for you to notice the pattern. 7, 5, 8, 2. Tell me, what comes next?" The coffee cup slipped from her hand, shattering against the linoleum floor in a splash of brown and white ceramic. Jake was already moving, signaling to the tech team to trace the call, but Liz knew it would be pointless. The Enigma didn't make mistakes. "You're asking the wrong question," she replied, forcing her voice to remain level, even as her mind raced. "The question isn't what comes next. It's what you're trying to tell us." A soft laugh, almost appreciative. "Finally, someone who understands the game isn't about winning or losing, it's about playing. Your move, Agent Harper." The line went dead. Jake was beside her immediately, his hand on her shoulder, grounding her back to reality. "What did he say?" "Liz, talk to me." She stared at the evidence board, at the red strings and photographs and timelines that suddenly seemed like child's drawings attempting to capture the wind. "He's not killing randomly. He's teaching us something. The thorns, the timing, the victims, it's all connected to something bigger. Connected to what? Liz turned to face him fully for the first time that evening, and Jake saw something in her eyes that made him step back. It wasn't fear or determination or even anger. It was recognition. Connected to me, she said quietly. Jake, I think he knows about Sarah. Sarah, her sister, dead 5 years now in what had been ruled an accidental drowning, but had never felt accidental to Liz. The case that had driven her to join the FBI, to specialize in behavioral analysis, to lose herself in the minds of killers in hopes of understanding the one who had taken the only family she'd had left. Jake's expression shifted from concern to something harder, more protective. That's impossible. Your sister's case was in Seattle, different jurisdiction, different everything. But even as he said it, Liz was already pulling up the file on her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard with desperate precision. The dates aligned too perfectly to be coincidence. The first Enigma killing had occurred exactly 5 years to the day after Sarah's death. The storm outside intensified, lightning illuminating the office in stark, momentary brilliance. In that flash, Liz saw it all laid out before her like a map of her own obsession. The Enigma wasn't just any killer. He was connected to her past, to the questions that haunted her sleepless nights, to the guilt that whispered that if she'd been there, if she'd paid attention, Sarah would still be alive. We need to revisit every piece of evidence, she said, her voice gaining strength with purpose. Look for connections to Seattle, to drowning victims, to anyone who might have known Sarah or been involved in the investigation. Jake hesitated. Liz, if this is personal, you need to recuse yourself. Morrison will do nothing, she interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument. Because we're not telling him, not yet. The Enigma chose me for this game, Jake. He's been planning it for years. If I step back now, people die, and we never find out the truth. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the war between protocol and partnership, between doing what was right and doing what was necessary. It was a battle she knew well, one she'd been fighting since the day she'd stood at Sarah's graveside and promised she would find answers. All right, Jake said finally, his voice rough with resignation and something else, something that might have been admiration. But we do this my way. No running off alone, no keeping secrets from me. We're partners, Liz. That means you trust me with all of it. She nodded, though they both knew trust was a luxury neither could fully afford in this profession. Trust meant vulnerability, and vulnerability in their world could mean death. As they began pulling files and cross-referencing data, neither noticed the small camera hidden in the air vent, its red light blinking steadily like a mechanical heartbeat. The Enigma watched from his own sanctuary, miles away, satisfied. The game had finally begun in earnest. The abandoned warehouse in Baltimore's industrial district breathed with shadows and rust, its broken windows like dead eyes staring at the gathering forensics team. Dawn was breaking grey and reluctant over the Chesapeake, painting everything in shades of exhaustion. Liz stood at the entrance, her breath misting in the cold morning air, trying to prepare herself for what waited inside. The call had come at 3 a.m., another body, another message, but this time the Enigma had accelerated his timeline. 48 hours, Jake said, checking his watch. He's never broken pattern before. Why now? Liz knew why, could feel it in the electric tension that had followed her since the phone call. He was escalating because she was paying attention, because she'd acknowledged the game. The realization should have terrified her, but instead it sharpened her focus to a knife's edge. Inside, the warehouse was a cathedral of decay. Pigeons roosted in the rafters, their cooing an obscene soundtrack to the scene below. The victim, a man in his 40s with prematurely grey hair, was positioned in the exact center of the concrete floor, arms spread wide, a white rose placed over his heart. 3 thorns remained on the stem. Marcus Chen, Detective Rodriguez from Baltimore PD said, approaching them with a tablet. 43, software engineer for a defense contractor. Divorced, no kids. His ex-wife reported him missing yesterday when he didn't show up for their dog's custody exchange. Liz knelt beside the body, pulling on latex gloves with practiced efficiency. The victim's expression was peaceful, almost serene, which made the violence of his death all the more disturbing. The enigma didn't torture his victims physically. The torture was reserved for those left behind, for those trying to understand. "There's something different," she murmured, noticing a small piece of paper tucked beneath the rose. Using tweezers, she extracted it carefully. Written in the same precise handwriting they'd found at other scenes were coordinates and a time: 392904 degree N, 76.6122 degree W. Tonight, midnight. Jake was already entering the coordinates into his phone. "That's here. These exact coordinates are this warehouse." The implications hung between them like a blade. The enigma was inviting them to a meeting, or setting a trap, or both. Around them, the forensics team continued their methodical documentation, unaware of the secondary game being played. "We need to tell Morrison," Jake said quietly, but his tone suggested he already knew Liz's answer. "If we bring in the full tactical team, he'll disappear. You know that." She stood, her mind already racing through possibilities. "He wants to talk to me, Jake. This whole thing, it's a conversation he's been trying to have for 5 years." Back at the field office, they worked in focused silence, building their profile with the new information. Marcus Chen's connection to the pattern emerged slowly, like a photograph developing in chemical solution. 5 years ago, he'd written the facial recognition software used by the Seattle Police Department, the same software that had failed to identify any suspects in Sarah Harper's death. Liz stared at the connection on her screen, feeling the walls of the case closing in around her. Each victim wasn't random. They were all threads in a tapestry of failure surrounding her sister's case. The kindergarten teacher had been Sarah's best friend, who'd cancelled plans with her the night she died. The mechanic had serviced the car of the last person to see Sarah alive. The nurse had been on duty at the ER where Sarah was pronounced dead. "Jesus Christ," Jake breathed, reading over her shoulder. "He's killing everyone connected to your sister's case. But why?" "Because he knows something," Liz said, her voice hollow. "He knows what really happened to her." The hours crawled toward midnight with agonizing slowness. Morrison had been fed a carefully crafted story about following up leads, nothing that would trigger a full response. Liz and Jake sat in their unmarked sedan outside the warehouse, the darkness complete, except for the distant glow of the port. "You're not going in alone," Jake said for the 5th time. "And you're not coming with me," she replied with equal firmness. "He sees you, he runs. This only works if I play by his rules, at least initially." At 11:45, she checked her service weapon, though she doubted it would matter. The enigma had proven he was always 3 steps ahead. At 11:55, she stepped out of the car, the cold hitting her like a physical presence. "Liz!" Jake called after her. She turned back to see genuine concern in his eyes, the kind that went beyond professional partnership. "Whatever he tells you, whatever you learn, remember that the truth isn't always what we need it to be." She nodded, understanding the warning even as she chose to ignore it. The truth about Sarah was all she'd wanted for 5 years. She wasn't about to turn away from it now. The warehouse was different in darkness, transformed into a maze of shadows and suggestions. She moved carefully, her flashlight cutting through the black, until she reached the center where Marcus Chen had been found. A single folding chair sat there now, with an envelope placed on its seat. She approached cautiously, every nerve screaming danger, but the warehouse remained silent except for her own breathing. The envelope was heavy, quality paper that spoke of careful planning. Inside was a photograph she'd never seen before. Sarah, taken perhaps a week before her death, standing outside a building Liz didn't recognize, talking to someone whose face was turned away from the camera. But it wasn't the image that made her blood freeze. It was the timestamp in the corner, proving the photo was taken at the exact time Sarah had told Liz she was at work. A phone rang somewhere in the darkness, the sound sharp and jarring. Following the sound, she found a burner phone duct taped to a support pillar. "You found it?" The Enigma's voice was warm, almost pleased. "The first truth. Your sister was lying to you, Agent Harper. The question is, are you brave enough to learn why? Where are you?" she demanded, spinning in the darkness, searching for any sign of movement. "Close enough to see you, far enough to remain a ghost. Tell me, what do you really know about Sarah's work, about the project she was involved in before she died?" Liz's mind raced. Sarah had been a data analyst for a tech startup, nothing controversial, nothing dangerous. Or so she'd always believed. "She was murdered," Liz said firmly. "You know who did it." "I know who ordered it," he corrected. "But knowing and proving are different games entirely. Your sister stumbled onto something she shouldn't have. Something involving people powerful enough to make her disappear and make it look accidental. Then why not just tell me? Why kill innocent people?" A pause, long enough that she wondered if he'd disconnected. Then, "Innocent? Agent Harper, I chose each of them specifically. The kindergarten teacher who claimed to be Sarah's best friend. She was paid to cancel their plans that night to ensure Sarah was alone. The mechanic, he tampered with the witness's car, ensuring they couldn't follow Sarah to her real destination. The nurse, she falsified the autopsy report. The warehouse spun around her as each revelation landed like a physical blow. You're lying. Am I? Check their bank records. 2 days after Sarah's death, each received exactly $50,000 from different shell companies. Companies that, if you dig deep enough, all trace back to a single source. Who? The word came out as barely more than a whisper. That's the game, isn't it? I give you the pieces, you assemble the picture, but be warned, Agent Harper. The moment you truly understand what happened to your sister, you'll have to choose between justice and survival. They're still watching, still protecting their secret. Why do you think I've been so careful? Why do you think I had to become this to get your attention?" The line went dead. Liz stood in the darkness, her flashlight beam shaking slightly as her hand trembled. Everything she'd believed about her sister's death, about the victims, about the Enigma himself, was fracturing like ice under pressure. When she finally emerged from the warehouse, Jake was standing beside the car, his face grim. "Rodriguez just called. They found something at Chen's apartment. Liz, he had files on Sarah, hundreds of documents about her work, about something called Project Mindbridge." She looked back at the warehouse, then at Jake, feeling the ground shift beneath her feet. The game the Enigma was playing wasn't about death at all. It was about resurrection, bringing truth back from the grave where powerful people had buried it. And she was going to play it to the end, no matter the cost. The safe house in Anacostia was off the books, a favor Jake had called in from his Detroit days when he'd protected a witness who'd later become a U.S. Marshal. They'd been there for 18 hours, surrounded by boxes of evidence, laptop screens glowing with data streams, and the growing certainty that they'd stepped into something far larger than a serial killer case. Project Mindbridge. The name appeared in fragments across Marcus Chen's hidden files, in encrypted emails Sarah had sent to herself as insurance, in government contracts that had been classified, then mysteriously destroyed. Liz sat cross-legged on the floor, photographs and documents spread around her like tarot cards, revealing a fortune she'd never wanted to hear. "Your sister was a whistleblower," Jake said, returning from the kitchen with fresh coffee and the exhausted look of someone who'd seen too much truth in too short a time. "She discovered that Mindbridge was using social media data to predict and manipulate political dissent. Not just surveillance, but actual behavioral modification through targeted information campaigns." Liz picked up a photograph from Chen's collection, showing Sarah at what looked like a corporate party, standing next to a man in an expensive suit. She recognized him now, David Kellerman, currently the deputy director of an intelligence agency that officially didn't exist. 5 years ago, he'd been a private contractor working on classified projects. Chen helped her steal the data, she continued, piecing together the narrative from the fragments. He was in love with her, would have done anything she asked, but someone found out. Her phone buzzed with an unknown number. They both tensed, but she answered on speaker. "You're learning," the Enigma's voice filled the small room, "but you're not seeing the full picture yet. Check the news, Agent Harper. Baltimore, 2 hours ago." Jake was already pulling up news sites on his tablet. The headline made them both freeze. Federal Judge Patricia Morse found dead in apparent suicide. She signed the warrant that allowed them to search Sarah's apartment after her death, the Enigma continued. She knew it was illegal, knew they were covering something up, but she signed it anyway. Guilt is a poison that works slowly, but inevitably. "You didn't kill her," Liz said, understanding flooding through her. "I didn't have to. I simply sent her copies of Sarah's real autopsy report, the one that showed defensive wounds, water in her lungs that didn't match the lake where she was found, traces of a paralytic drug in her system. The truth killed Patricia Morse, not me." Jake grabbed the phone. "Who are you? How do you know all this?" A pause, then a sound that might have been a bitter laugh. "I was Project Mindbridge's lead programmer, Agent Williams. I designed the algorithms that could predict human behavior with 94% accuracy. I built the tools they used to destroy anyone who opposed them, and I watched them use my creation to murder the only person who ever made me believe I could be something more than a weapon." Liz's breath caught. The careful way he'd staged each scene, the mathematical precision, the ability to stay ahead of law enforcement, it all made sense now. He wasn't just intelligent, he was someone who understood systems, patterns, the hidden mathematics of human behavior. "Sarah trusted you," she said softly. "She was the only one who ever did. She came to me when she discovered what Mindbridge was really being used for. We were going to expose it together, but I was a coward. I wanted more evidence, more proof, more time. She went ahead alone, and they killed her for it." The weight of 5 years of guilt colored every word. Liz recognized it because she carried the same burden, the if-onlys and should-haves that haunted her quiet moments. "So you became the Enigma to get justice?" "I became what they forced me to become. Every person I've removed was complicit in her murder or its cover-up, but I needed someone with the resources and determination to finish what Sarah started. I needed you." Jake was pacing now, his detective instincts warring with the enormity of what they were uncovering. "You have the evidence. Why not just release it?" "Because they control the narrative. Any leak would be discredited, blamed on foreign interference or dismissed as conspiracy theory. But an FBI investigation, one that uncovers the truth organically, that's harder to bury." Liz stood, decision crystallizing in her mind. "Where are you?" "Room 314 at the Marriott in Crystal City. I'll be here for another hour. Come alone or don't come at all." The line died. Jake immediately started grabbing his jacket, but Liz stopped him with a hand on his arm. "You know I have to go alone." "Like hell. This is insane, Liz. He's a killer, regardless of his motives. He's also the only person who knows what really happened to Sarah, and he's right. If we bring him back up, if we follow protocol, this gets buried. The people who killed Sarah are still out there, still in power." Jake's jaw clenched, but she saw acceptance creeping into his eyes. He'd been a cop too long not to recognize the truth. Sometimes justice and the law were different things entirely. The drive to Crystal City was surreal in its normalcy. Rush hour traffic, people heading home from work, everyone oblivious to the weight of conspiracy and murder that rode with her. Room 314 was at the end of a quiet hallway, the door slightly ajar. She entered carefully, weapon drawn but pointed low. The room was sparse, just a laptop on the desk and a man standing by the window, looking out at the Potomac. When he turned, she saw a face that was utterly unremarkable. Middle-aged, average height, the kind of person you'd pass 1,000 times without noticing. The perfect ghost. "Agent Harper," he said. and she finally had a name to put to the voice. "I'm Dr. Michael Foster, though that identity died with Sarah." "You loved her." It wasn't a question, and he didn't treat it as one. "I loved who she helped me believe I could be. Before her, I was just code and algorithms, solving problems for people who saw human beings as data points. She saw more." He moved to the laptop, typing quickly. "Everything is here. Financial records, communication logs, the real Mindbridge files, enough to destroy them all. But once you have this, they'll come for you, like they came for her. Then why give it to me?" Michael looked at her with eyes that held too much pain for one lifetime. "Because you're not alone. Agent Williams is a good man, and more importantly, he's clean. No connections to any of this. Together, you might survive what comes next." He handed her a flash drive, their fingers brushing briefly. His hand was steady, calm, like someone who'd made peace with his fate. "The seventh victim," she said suddenly. "Who's next?" "There is no seventh victim. There never was going to be. This ends with the truth coming out one way or another." He moved back to the window. "You should go. In about 10 minutes, David Kellerman is going to get a call telling him I've surfaced. He'll send everyone. Come with me. We can protect you." Michael smiled, the expression transforming his unremarkable face into something almost beautiful. "No, you can't, but you can finish what Sarah started. You can make her death mean something." She wanted to argue, but the sound of sirens in the distance made the decision for her. She took the drive and headed for the door, pausing at the threshold. "Thank you," she said, "for caring about her, for making sure she wasn't forgotten. Tell the truth, Agent Harper, no matter how much it costs. That's all any of us can do." She ran then, down the hallway and stairs, out through the parking garage, as black SUVs screeched into the hotel's main entrance. She made it to her car and drove away steadily, normally just another commuter in the evening flow. In her rearview mirror, she saw helicopters converging on the hotel. Her phone rang. "Jake." "Liz, where are you? Morrison just called. They're saying you've gone rogue, that you're working with the Enigma." "I have it, Jake. Everything. Sarah was murdered, and I can prove it." "Then we go in together. We present it to—" "No, they're all compromised. Morrison, the assistant director, maybe even the director himself. Project Mindbridge had fingers everywhere." Silence on the line, then. "What do you need me to do?" That was Jake, she thought with a rush of gratitude. No more arguments, just tactical support when it mattered most. "Contact Lisa Huang at the Washington Post. She's been investigating government surveillance overreach for years. Tell her we have everything on Mindbridge. Then meet me at the place where we had our first case together." He'd understand. The abandoned church in Tacoma Park, where they'd caught their first killer as partners. It was poetic in a way. As she drove through the darkening city, she thought about Sarah, about Michael Foster, about the price of truth in a world built on lies. Behind her, she knew, forces were mobilizing, but ahead lay something more powerful, the chance to finally give her sister justice. The game the Enigma had started was entering its final moves, and Liz intended to win. The abandoned church in Tacoma Park stood like a monument to forgotten faith, its stained glass windows dark, its doors chained shut for a decade. But Liz knew the loose board in the back that gave access to anyone desperate enough to seek sanctuary. Inside, the air was thick with dust and old prayers, moonlight streaming through broken windows to create a chessboard of light and shadow across the floor. Jake was already there, standing near the altar with Lisa Huang from the Washington Post and someone Liz didn't expect, Assistant Director Morrison himself. Her hand went to her weapon immediately, but Morrison raised both hands, his usual commanding presence, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "Before you shoot me, Harper, know that I've been running my own investigation for 3 years. Your sister wasn't the first person they killed to protect Mindbridge." The revelation hit her like cold water. Jake stepped forward, placing himself strategically between them. "He came to me 6 months ago, Liz. That's why he paired us together. He knew the Enigma would eventually surface, knew you were the key to breaking this open." Lisa Huang, a small woman with intense eyes and the kind of stillness that came from years of watching and waiting, spoke up. "I've verified the files Agent Williams provided. This is bigger than Watergate, bigger than anything we've seen. A shadow program that's been manipulating elections, protests, even economic trends for profit and power." Liz kept her weapon drawn, but lowered. "My sister died for this information." "Many people did," Morrison said quietly. "My partner, Tom Bradley, was killed in what they called a car accident 3 years ago when he started asking questions. That's when I learned to work in the shadows, to build a team of people they couldn't buy or threaten. Why didn't you tell me?" The betrayal stung, even as she understood the necessity. Because your genuine emotion, your real drive for revenge, was what the Enigma needed to see. Michael Foster was brilliant but paranoid. He would have detected any deception. The sound of helicopters in the distance made them all tense. Morrison checked his phone, his face grim. "They're mobilizing everything. Kellerman knows Foster gave you the evidence. In about 15 minutes, this place will be surrounded." "Then we run," Jake said, already moving toward the back exit. "No." Liz's voice was firm, decisive. "Running means they win. They spin the narrative, paint us as conspirators, bury the truth under accusations and legal proceedings that will take years to untangle." Lisa Huang pulled out her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "I can upload everything now, but without context, without a credible source on record, it's just data. People won't understand what it means." That's when Liz realized what had to happen, what Michael Foster had known from the beginning. "Start recording," she told Lisa. "Everything, audio, video, whatever you have." As the journalist set up her equipment, Liz stood in the center of the church, badge and gun placed on the altar behind her. She began to speak, her voice steady and clear. "My name is Special Agent Elizabeth Harper. 5 years ago, my sister Sarah Harper was murdered for trying to expose a government program called Project Mindbridge. Tonight, I have evidence that proves not only her murder, but a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of our intelligence community." She laid it all out, methodically, precisely. The murders attributed to the Enigma that were actually executions of conspirators, the technology that had been used to manipulate public opinion. The people who had profited from tragedy and chaos, they themselves had orchestrated. Jake added his testimony, followed by Morrison, who revealed 3 years of covert investigation, names of other agents who had died or been silenced. Lisa Huang asked the hard questions, the ones that would occur to skeptics and believers alike. The helicopters were louder now, and through the broken windows, they could see searchlights beginning to sweep the area. "We need to go," Jake urged, but Liz shook her head. "You go. All of you, get the story out. Multiple copies, multiple outlets. Make it impossible to suppress." Morrison understood first. "Harper, no. There has to be another way. Someone has to be here when they arrive. Someone has to be the face of this revelation, the person they have to publicly arrest or publicly exonerate. If we all run, we're fugitives. If I stay, I'm a whistleblower." Jake grabbed her arm. "They'll kill you." "Not immediately, not with the press already alerted. They'll have to arrest me, process me, and by then, the story will be everywhere." She looked at Lisa. "You have everything you need?" The journalist nodded, already backing up files to multiple cloud servers. "This will be online in 20 minutes, broadcast media in an hour. They can't stop it all." Morrison pulled out a second badge, one Liz didn't recognize. "Inspector General's office. I've been working both sides. This gives you federal protection as a whistleblower. It's not much, but it's something." The sound of vehicles screeching to halt outside made the decision final. Jake pressed something into her hand, a small recording device. "Everything that happens from now on gets documented," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You don't face them alone, even if you're the only one in the room." They left through the back as the front doors exploded inward, tactical teams flooding the space. Liz stood calmly by the altar, hands visible, the very picture of someone with nothing to hide and everything to reveal. David Kellerman himself entered, his face a mask of cold fury barely contained. Behind him, enough firepower to level the church. "Agent Harper, you're under arrest for treason, conspiracy, and aiding a known terrorist. I'm a federal whistleblower reporting crimes committed by members of the intelligence community, including yourself, Director Kellerman." She held up Morrison's badge. "I have protection under the Inspector General Act." His eye twitched, the first crack in his composure. "Where's Foster?" "Dead, I assume. Your teams hit the hotel room 40 minutes ago." But even as she said it, she wondered. Michael Foster had survived 5 years as a ghost. Would he really have waited for them to arrive? Kellerman stepped closer, close enough that his words wouldn't be picked up by the recordings she was obviously making. "Your sister thought she was smart too, thought the truth mattered more than power. You see where it got her." "Yes," Liz said, loud enough for every microphone in the room. "Murdered by a conspiracy that you led, Director Kellerman. A conspiracy that Project Mindbridge documents prove beyond any doubt." The sound of news helicopters joining the military ones outside made Kellerman's jaw clench. Someone whispered urgently in his ear, probably telling him that the story was already breaking, that reporters were asking for statements. "Take her," he ordered, stepping back. As they cuffed her, Liz felt a strange sense of peace. Sarah's death had meaning now. The truth she'd died for would finally see light. And somewhere out there, she hoped Michael Foster was watching, knowing that his terrible gambit had worked. The last thing she saw as they led her out was Jake and Morrison in the crowd that had gathered, both recording everything. Lisa Huang was doing a live broadcast, her words carrying across the internet faster than any attempt to suppress them. The transport van was waiting, but so were the news vans. As they pushed her inside, she heard a familiar voice. The driver, his face turned away, spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. "Thank you, Agent Harper. Sarah would be proud." Michael Foster, still playing the game, still 3 moves ahead. "This isn't over," she whispered back. "No," he agreed, pulling away from the chaos with practiced calm. "It's just beginning." 3 hours later, the transport van was found abandoned by the Potomac, doors open, no sign of struggle. Agent Elizabeth Harper had vanished, but her testimony was already playing on every major network. Within days, congressional hearings were announced. Within weeks, arrests began. David Kellerman was found dead in his cell before trial, apparent suicide, though no one could explain how he'd obtained the means. Project Mindbridge was officially terminated, its architects scattered or silenced. A year later, Jake Williams received a postcard from a small town in Montana. No signature, just coordinates and a time. When he arrived, he found Liz waiting in a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. "You look good for a dead woman," he said, sliding into the booth across from her. "Death was the only way to be truly free from them," she replied, her appearance altered enough to be unrecognizable to casual observation. "Foster taught me that. He's been dead for 5 years after all." "Is he here?" She smiled, the expression lighter than he'd ever seen on her. "He's everywhere and nowhere, like the truth itself." They talked for hours about the case, about justice, about the price of truth in a world built on comfortable lies. When it was time to leave, Jake asked the question that had haunted him. "Was it worth it? Everything you sacrificed?" Liz thought of Sarah, of the 7 victims who were also perpetrators, of Michael Foster carrying his guilt like armor. She thought of the thousands of people who would never know their lives had been manipulated, but who were now free from that invisible hand. "Ask me in another 5 years," she said, standing to leave, "when we see what grows in the ground we've cleared." She walked out into the Montana sunset, disappearing into a new life built on the ashes of the old. Jake never saw her again, but sometimes, when a case seemed impossibly complex, he'd find an anonymous tip that led him exactly where he needed to go. The enigma had never been caught, officially. But then, some games aren't meant to end with capture. They're meant to end with transformation, with truth emerging from lies like butterflies from cocoons, beautiful and terrible and absolutely necessary. In the FBI archives, the case remains open, a reminder that sometimes the greatest mysteries aren't about finding the killer, but understanding why they chose to kill. And sometimes, just sometimes, the answer to that question changes everything.